these pages are packed with insights and halachic ramifications. There's numerous laws in halacha that are connected to these pages of Gemara, and of course, it's impossible for us to stay too long on the Gemara. I don't want to bore anyone, but I do want to give you at least a lot of the at least touch upon a lot of the insights. So the first thing I did was I did print up this Chacham Tzvi, his responsa regarding the person who was created by the Sefer Yetzirah, someone created by through the book of formation, which the Chacham Tzvi brings from the Gemara Sanhedrin, that it says Rava bara Gavra. Rava created a person. And then he brings that they mention about a certain Av Bezdin of Chelm. Anyone hear of the city called Chelm?
Yeah, that's actually a city of fools.
So the truth is that they joke around that it was a city of fools, but
yeah,
I met someone from Chelm, and I am told
too.
that really the Chelm people are actually brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's why they would make a joke that they're fools in a sarcastic way, but really they were very knowledgeable. Anyway, there was a Av Bezdin in the city of Chelm who created a golem. He created a golem. He must have been a great Kabbalist. And the question that the Chacham Tzvi has is, would this person join a minyan of 10 to be able to say Kaddish and Kedusha? So on the one hand, he says, we don't know if we can call him sanctifying God's name, that amongst the Jews, you want to sanctify God's name. He says, if that's based on that, maybe he should not be able to count towards the minyan. Or maybe he says, since we have a law that if a person brings up an orphan in his household, the Torah considers it as if he gave birth to him. And they bring a proof from the story of Michal and Meirav, the wives of King David, that it says Michal brought the children up, but they were really Meirav's children. So we see that that these are the accomplishments of the tzaddikim, so they're called Bnei Yisrael, because Maisa Yadav Shel Tzaddikim is Toldoisam, the actions of the tzaddikim. These are their children, and then he says that since we find that Reb Zera said that Reb Zera found this guy that Rava had created, and Reb Zera told him, he says, you are created from one of these Tanoim. And he says, so first he says he was talking to him. Rava created this person. He sent him to Reb Zera. This is a Gemara in Sanhedrin on page 65. So the Gemara says that Rava created this person. He sent him to Reb Zera. Reb Zera spoke to him and he didn't answer anything. So Reb Zera said, you must be a creation of one of the rabbis. Go back to your afar, go back to your dust. And the understanding, at least that the Chacham Tzvi has, is that he killed him, basically. Now, he says, if you think that he could join a minyan, why would Reb Zera have killed him? Even if there's no prohibition in killing such a person, because the prohibition of killing only applies to someone who was once in the womb. It doesn't apply to another person. Now, and he learns it from a verse, Shreifech dam ha'adam ba'adam, only someone who was born in a womb would there be a prohibition of killing, so that you're prohibited shvichas damim. So this person would not be included in killing, but still, what would the benefit be to kill him if he could join a minyan. He says it must be that he's not able to join a minyan. And that's what it seems to me, Tzvi Ashkenazi, and that's how he ends this tshuva. So this is his responsa number 93. If anyone wants to look it up, probably it is a famous tshuva. That's how I know that it's how I know about it. And but that is a very interesting thing. Now I will tell you that the Yavitz, who's the son of the Chacham Tzvi, he questions his father, and he says, "What type of question is that? Is for sure this person doesn't have das, he doesn't have knowledge. He's no better than a cherishet of a katan, and no better than a fool, and he can't. And even though he might have some type of das, but he can't join a minyan, and although it sounds like he probably could understand because Rava sent him to Reb Zera, but on the other hand, probably not, because if he couldn't speak, so he probably couldn't understand either. And maybe he understood little hints or types of sign language type of thing. But that's the same as a dog, and a dog can't join a minyan. A dog also catches on when you show him different things and you make different signals to tell him different things. So for sure, he says he can't join a minyan. And then there's another sefer that brings a taz, it brings an opinion in the Shulchan Aruch that says that a person who's sleeping cannot join a minyan. And he says because when a person sleeps, the neshama leaves the body. And he says the same thing as a person who's created through Sefer Yetzirah. He doesn't have a neshama. You can't get the neshama into him. You could create him, so he can't have there's no kedusha. He can't join. So this is a discussion, and it is interesting in chapter 55 in the Shulchan Aruch. It does talk about a person who's sleeping, if he could join together for the minyan. And even though the Shulchan Aruch implies that he could join, but the Taz argues over there and says he can't join. And the Pri Chadash also says Yashin is considered like a shaita. So the Mishabura says L'chatchila you should wake him, or at least he should be somewhat awake. So it seems like a big discussion about having someone sleeping if they join for the minyan. Could be problematic, especially in small communities where you have a very tight minyan, and especially when you have a long rabbi's speech, especially if it's boring and he puts you to sleep, especially if he speaks before like Kriyas HaTorah or something, and so you really need the minyan, and could be a big problem. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I think when the man is sleeping, the neshama left him. How can he join a minyan?
Oh, so that's the Taz. That's
a
the way
goy
the
doesn't
Taz.
have a neshama. If you don't have the neshama, how can you join the minyan?
So it doesn't really. The interesting thing, it doesn't really say you need a neshama. It says you need to be a yid. Now, is a person a yid when he sleeps? He's a yid. He's b'nai Yisrael. But the Taz seems to say that. The Pri Chadash seems to emphasize that this person who's sleeping. Now, the Bir Halacha over here says, if you rely on the Shulchan Aruch, the Pri Megadim says you didn't lose. So you could rely on the Shulchan Aruch even if the person's sleeping in a case of B'diavad. And he brings the Chayadam and so he says maybe in a place where they daven he brings that it could be in certain scenario where that you could be lenient. In a place where they don't do the entire Chazaras Hashatz, where they don't repeat the entire repetition of Shemona Esrei, but they only do like the Kedusha out loud. So maybe you could be lenient that it's not a bracha levatala. In other words, when you do the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, that becomes more complicated. But there are shuls that, like for Mincha, they skip the repetition of the Shemona Esrei. That type of a shul, he says there maybe you could be maybe more lenient because it's not a bracha in vain, because you're not doing a repetition of the Shemona Esrei, you're just doing Kedusha in the Shemona Esrei. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that normally the proper way in a shul to daven is the congregation says the Shemona Esrei, and the person leading the services, called the Shliach Tzibur, he repeats the entire Shemona Esrei, all 19 brachas. That's the norm. There are places that they have some excuse, that they're in a rush, or they have to go learn, or they have to, there's some type of excuse that people have that they do it. And I don't know what at weddings, but I don't know if wedding is the excuse. But whatever it is, the excuse.
At airports,
they might lose their flight, they might miss their flight. I don't know.
No,
anyway,
you have a tzibur and you have people around. You don't necessarily want to go through 19 brachas yelling amen each time out loud when you have, strangers around you. I'm just saying why
right, maybe. Okay. Maybe they're embarrassed. Okay. Maybe there's an excuse.
Embarrassed.
They don't want to make a scene. Okay, whatever it is. There might be some reasons, more acceptable reasons than others in different scenarios, but there are scenarios where people do this, and they, instead of doing the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and during the repetition you say the Kedusha, Kadosh, 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 Baruch Kavod Hashem Mkomo, you say that Kedusha. Instead of doing that whole thing, they say, you know what? Let the Chazan just say the Shemona Esrei out loud in the beginning, and during his own personal Shemona Esrei, you can have during his own personal Shemona Esrei, you can have the Chazan stop at the Kedusha, and everyone can answer the Kedusha. And then after he finishes the Kedusha, you just continue, everyone continues quietly. People who everyone else is starting their Shemona Esrei, at least according to some customs or other customs, they have the entire community says the Shemona Esrei together, at least quietly, while the Chazan says the first part. And then they do Kedusha, and then afterwards, everyone just says the whole thing quietly. And they don't do a repetition of the Shemona Esrei. Now, if you do that, there's more leniency to rely on a person who's sleeping for the minyan, because in that scenario, you're not saying a bracha levatala. You're not doing the bracha in vain. In case this is not called a minyan, what did you do wrong? You added a kedusha in your Shemona Esrei, but you didn't do wrong. You didn't say a bracha to Hashem in vain. In other words, if you repeat Shemona Esrei and it's really not called a minyan, then you really said a bracha in vain. And so here, what you're doing is you're just adding kedusha, and you didn't say a bracha in vain because you anyway need to say Shemona Esrei yourself, and you didn't do a repetition. So that would be also a place where a person could maybe be more lenient. Anyway, so this is the law about sleeping that comes up when we deal with this question of a person being counted for a minyan who's a golem. Anyway, it is interesting that they discuss that. The other thing, yes.
A fast question: is it too late to bring a point about Rabbi Eliezer and the golem?
Go for it. Tell us. What do you want to say?
It seems like you don't have to worry if the golem's allowed to be used for a minyan, because it would have taken Rabbi Eliezer time to make a golem. He would have to go out and find clay someplace in the middle of the night, and by that time, it would be too late for the davening anyway.
So that's your.
It doesn't just come in a second. There's work involved in making a golem, as far as I understand.
So I don't know. I've never made a golem. And I also don't.
It tells about Rabbi Lowe. He went out to the river and he took clay and he had to form it.
Right.
Yeah.
The only thing I do know is that in the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, it does seem that Rebbe Eliezer was a Kabbalist of the greatest level. And if it took Rabbi Yehuda Lowe time to make the golem, I don't know that it would have taken the same time for Rabbi Eliezer. Again, we're dealing with.
Good answer. Thank you.
That's just a thought, but I'm not disagreeing. Maybe your point is a good point. But I did bring up the other day that that one person says, you see from our Gemara that it's not acceptable to do to use for a minyan a golem, because Rabbi Eliezer could have theoretically could have created a golem to make his minyan, and instead he released his slave from slavery. Now the only thing that
I understand that if I had a point, one of the commentaries would have mentioned it.
Okay, I can't say I looked at every commentary, but I think it's a good point what you're saying. I'm just sharing you an opposite way of thinking. But I will say one thing about this, and that is that the answer could also be that Rebbe Eliezer was also unsure of a golem working. So not that it definitely doesn't work. Maybe he had the same unclarity that the Chacham Tzvi had. And maybe he was unsure if it works or not, and therefore he didn't do that. Instead, he would rather free a slave to be definite that he has his minyan instead of the other. So again, in other words, I don't know that you can prove that a golem is not counted for a minyan in a definite way, but at least maybe you could prove that it's questionable if he could be counted for a minyan. And maybe Rebbe Eliezer was unsure. So that's also maybe something to mention. Yes, Ezra.
Yeah, but Rabbi Lowe had his golem up in the attic of the shul, so he could have called it at any time that he wished. So we're talking about maybe not the first time, but the second time, the golem of Prague existed and was always put in the attic and was only let loose when was necessary. So, I mean, that would answer the question before, but wouldn't answer the question as why did Eliezer not create a golem?
Wait, so what would that answer? So your main point is that
his point was that he had to go to the river and get clay in order to be able to create, etc. And I'm saying Rabbi Lowe had his golem up in the attic of the shul, so he could have brought him down anytime in order to make the 10th man if he needed it.
Right,
so,
but
that answers that question, but doesn't answer the question why Eliezer never mentioned a golem in here.
Right. Well, the thing is, we don't know about the Maharal, if he ever used him for a minyan or not. Maybe he did. We don't know. It's not like we can bring any proof from the Maharal that he was there and he could have and he didn't. You know what I mean? We need to know for a fact that he never used him for the minyan.
Oh.
And maybe he never needed a minyan. Maybe the Maharal Shul, it could be he had thousands of people going there. He didn't need him. You know what I mean? That's not why he made him. He didn't make him for the minyan issue.
He didn't.
A lot of Chabad rabbis would love to be able to create a golem and have them help their minyan, especially because they don't talk back, the golems. They don't. They have no problems. They're only only benefit. But they also help for security. So you got everything there. But in any event, it's a good point. Good point you have it. Maybe Rebbe Eliezer had a golem. I guess that's also an interesting point that you sort of bring up, that Maybe Rabbi Eliezer had a golem and he could have just brought him down and he didn't. Okay, so the bottom line is that we're up to this Gemara here, where we had all of these leniencies, and the Gemara concludes on the top of 48a, Memches Amud Aleph, V'leis hilchasa kachol hanishmaitza. Let's start from there. The halacha does not follow all of these statements, these I guess you could translate as statements, but rather what it says, Ela ki hadam Rav Nachman, but what does the halacha follow? It follows this, that Rav Nachman said, Katan hayodea lamni mevarchen mezamnin olav, a child that knows to who you say a bracha to, him you could do a zimun on. So him you could include in a zimun. So we can't rely on a maybe the law that people are studying Torah that's considered a zimun. They're mechaded with halacha. We can't rely on the child that is he's 12 years old and but he did bring the Cyrus, he has pubic hairs, or a child that's 13 but his pubic hairs aren't big enough, or we relying on the law that two people when you have 9 people with the would that look like 10, that's good enough. And the other law that a child that is in a cradle, you could count him in the minyan. We don't follow all of these leniencies. What do we follow? That a child that knows who you say a bracha to, you could do a zimun on. You could do a zimun with. So it's all about age and knowledge, basically. In other words, if he's old enough to know, if he knows, I shouldn't say age, it's really knowledge. If he's knowledgeable enough to know who to say a bracha to, then that should work. Now, there are commentaries that discuss, is that any age, or is there a certain cutoff where that works from a certain age and on, but it doesn't work below a certain age. So, for example, if a child is 3 years old and he knows that Hashem is everywhere and you dive into Hashem created the world and so on, would that be good enough to include him, or is there a certain cutoff age? Is it the age of 11? We do know of certain ages that are considered some type of maturity. For example, in the laws of Nidarim, in the laws of vows, we do have a law, mufla hasamach le'ish, that the age where a person's vow is counted, if they know to who you make a vow to. If they know that, then their vow is counted at the age of year before their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. So the age of 12 does have certain halachic rulings. It has certain halachic applicable laws, which have to do with the laws of Nidarim. Mufla hasamach le'ish it's called that age that's right near becoming a man. So maybe from the age of 12 for a man and the age of 11 for a woman would be that age. Of course, here we're talking about men doing the zimun. So would this law of Yodei Alamim Avarchin, you know who you say a bracha to, would that start at the age of 12? Or does it apply even earlier? There is another age of some level of maturity that, or that the body is mature, at least the certain maybe there's an age of 9, which is a person can the age where their relations are called relations. We do find different ages that the child is considered that they're considered like somewhat of an adult. We do know the age of chinuch for certain mitzvahs, and maybe the mitzvah of benching. Maybe that would be the certain age. But in any event, our Gemara just mentions this katan yodei lamim avarchin. You could do a zima. Now, but we don't follow the other halachos. Now, I translated this according to the simple reading of the Gemara. However, there's a very complicated Tosfos on the side of this Gemara that has numerous ways, has a few ways of learning this. And based on the different ways of learning this, you come up with different final halachas. And as we know, and I mentioned, Ezra, maybe you could tell us, how does it work in the Sephardic community with regard to benching? I know they do, I'm told that they do include a child. Is there a certain age?
Yeah, if he understands what he's doing, he's allowed.
Any age, 6 is counted.
I think, they have to understand what they're doing. I don't think it's 6, maybe, age of chinuch, at the time that they understand what benching is about and what it's all, what it all means, then I think in that situation they allow.
So, but it doesn't,
So
he
in
doesn't
other
have
words,
to be 12.
he doesn't have to be bar mitzvah. He could be before bar mitzvah as long as he understands what he's doing.
Right. So, so the common accepted law for Ashkenazic Jews is we don't count the child for the zimun to be included, to make the zimun. But in the Sephardic community, they do, and they're basing it on this Gemara. The question is, what do we do with this Gemara? How do the Ashkenazic Jews learn the Gemara? And the thing is that there's a big discussion over here in Tosfos of different ways of learning this Gemara based on some questions on the Gemara as well. But let me finish with the next piece, and then we will maybe talk. Oh, and then my time is up. So maybe maybe tomorrow we'll talk more about the different ways of learning the Gemara. So let's finish the next little piece. It has the story of Rava and Abaye. Abaye v'Rava have a yasvi kamei de Rava. Abaye and Rava were sitting in front of Rava. Amrlu Rava said to them, Lami mavarchin, who do you say a bracha to? Amri lei l'rachmana. They said to Rava, they were children, right? They were little children, and definitely not bar mitzvah. And they said to Rabbah, you say a bracha to Hashem, Rachmana. Rachmana, the merciful one, literally. Rachmana, the merciful one. Rachmana hecha Yosef. And where does the merciful one dwell or sit? Rava achve l'shmei tlala. Rava pointed to the roof. Abaye nafak levara. Abaye went outside. Achve, he pointed klape shmaya towards the heaven. Amar lahu Rabba. So Rabba told them, Tarvaichu Rabbanan Havisu, you will both be great rabbis. Hainu Damri Inshi, Butzin. This is what people say, Butzin, big pumpkins, Kitve Yediya, from a young age, it is known that they're going to be, how they're going to grow, that they're going to be big, and they're going to be good from a young age. So from the time that they're blossoming, they're blooming, and the mikitve literally means from the sap. From the sap, when it's young, you can tell already that how it's going to be. That it's going to be good. Now, what the Gemara is basically saying is that Rabbah tested them to see if they knew Lami Mavarchin, who you say a bracha to. Now, one way of learning this Gemara is that he wanted to count them in for the Zimun. So he needed to know, and that's the connection with the previous Gemara. He needed to know if they could be counted. So he asked them if they know where Hashem is, or who Hashem is, who you say a bracha to. Now, another way of learning the Gemara is that this had nothing to do with the Zimun. They didn't eat together. They were just sitting there. And Rabbah was just testing them to see, like you ask a child a question, you want to see how he answers. So Rabbah was just testing them. But that is the test that you use for a zimun. Not that Rabbah was doing a zimun with them. We just see from that, you see a similar thing that Rabbah did with with Abaye and Rava. And that's the type of thing that you would want to do if you needed to do a zimun. And really, if you learn it that way, so it could be that they were really very little children. They were very small. And Rabbah was actually very impressed with them. At their young age, that they knew Lamim Mavarch. In other words, they're definitely not bar mitzvah people, Abaye and Rav at this age. But the question is, how small were they? So if they were very young, so Rabbah was just having a fun time asking them, do you know who to say a bracha to or not? And they answered very smart, very wisely. He was very impressed. The other way of learning is that it didn't matter how small they were. We wanted to know the halacha. He wanted to know halachically, are they counted for the zimun? If you wanted to know halachically, if they counted for the zimun, it could be that they were 10, and most people know at that age. But he still needed to ask them. So he asked them, and of course he was impressed. But he said, said a nice compliment. But it wasn't necessarily that they were extremely young. Maybe he was asking for the zimun. He's impressed. So yeah, they obviously were not that old. They couldn't have been too old. But was this a practical question, or was it just an interesting question? Now, I mentioned yesterday, I started mentioning that there is a vart here. I found it. It's from the Tzitz Eliezer. He brings that his teacher, Reb Pesach Tzvi Frank, one of the chief rabbis of Israel, that he had told him he visited him in the sukkah, and the last sukkahs of his life. The the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, what's his last name? Waldman? Forget his last name. Rabbi Eliezer, Tzitz Eliezer. Waldenberg, that's it. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg. That he's a great posek, a great halachic codifier of medical questions in halacha. So anyway, he brings here that Tzvi Pesach Frank tried to explain this Gemara when he visited him, and it was at the end of his life. He was very sick, and so he mentioned this Gemara, and he told him that Abaye didn't have parents, and Rava had parents. Abaye was an orphan. His father passed away before he was born. His mother passed away during childbirth. So Abaye didn't have parents, and he explained that to Rava that had parents. So the house symbolized that Hashem gives food to his household, and he receives it through the house from Hashem, and that's why he pointed towards the ceiling, because his food ultimately comes from his parents, but he knows that it really comes. It looks like it comes from his parents, but ultimately it really comes from Hashem. So that was his message, that he pointed towards the ceiling because he gets it from his parents, from his household, and but ultimately it comes from Hashem. Now, and the household is only like an emtsoi. It's like a medium, a middleman, so to speak, for him to get his produce. But he says, but Abaye didn't have parents, and he didn't get his parnasa, his sustenance, from his parents because they're not there, and therefore he pointed outside that he gets it straight from Hashem, that ki avi v'ime yazavuni v'Hashem yasfeni, that my father and mother have forsaken me, but Hashem is the one who gathered me in and gives me everything that I need. And so he was saying that I get my sustenance directly from Hashem, and that's why he went outside. And so that was the interesting thing here, that Rava pointed to the ceiling, and Abaye went outside. And he says, and Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg ends off. He says, and now that Tzvi Pesach Frank passed away, so it is like we have no one to rely on but Hashem. We considered him a great, great scholar. And he says this was his sort of a eulogy that he was eulogizing, but he explained this Gemara in this eulogy. So anyway, that's an interesting explanation on the Gemara based on their personalities. Okay, my time is up. I want to wish you a good day. See you later.
Thank you, Rabbi. somebody
Okay.
put these words to song.
Which word?
"En lanu al mi leishaen ela al Hashem."
Uh-huh.
Have a good day.
Okay, shkoyach.
All right.